Oh my God. Actually, this is a pretty good story. So this cop pulls me over and he's like speaking Spanish to me, and I don't know what's going. I'm like panicking. I'm freaking out because I'm on the highway. I'm like holding up traffic, and like I'm like, "What do you want, man?" Like I don't know what to say, but eventually I figured out like with a little bit of Spanish I could speak, and like I kind of pieced together what he was saying. And it was pretty apparent like he was kind of giving me a ticket, and he needed like my documents. So I like passed him all my documents and my license and stuff, and I was like kind of calming down a little bit. Like, okay, this is fine. Like, I'm probably just gonna get a ticket. But then he was like, he was pointing to my license and he was like, I'm going to take this. Like, I'm taking your license. And I was like, no, you cannot take my license. Like, I need my license. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to take it. And then, like, as we were trying to figure out this interaction, he somehow recognized, so I'm renting a car and it has this big logo on it that says, like, Gallo Pinto or something. And he recognized the logo and he pointed at it and he was like, whose car is this? And I was like, it's like this guy Emerson. Like I rented it from Emerson. And he's like, ah, Emerson, mi amigo. He's like, I know Emerson. So he takes out his
What?
phone and he calls the guy. And so the three of us are like, well, him and I are passing the phone back and forth between the guy I rented the car from, who can speak English and Spanish, and then the cop, and he's translating for us. And we're having this conversation. And so I'm on the phone with the guy who I'm renting the car from, and he's like, okay, you're gonna have to bribe this cop. Like
Of course,
you're
yeah.
gonna have to bribe the cop. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, be really careful, but like take out $20 and put it underneath your registration document. Pass him the registration document. He's gonna take the $20. He's gonna give you the license back. And so I did that, and it was fine. And I passed the phone back, and it was all good.
But like for real, like would you have ever thought like say like your first year engineering self that like eventually one day like your journey like would take you to be like in Nicaragua and you're not even I don't even think like you're not doing that much engineering in like the job that you have right now, right? Like you've kind of strayed away from the path. Like would you
No,
have imagined that in a few years you're doing all this?
not at all. Yeah, definitely not Nicaragua. I've never had plans to go to Nicaragua except for in the last like 2 months. That was completely out of the blue, and yeah, it was not something I'd premeditated or like thought a lot about. Like I wasn't. It wasn't 3 years ago me being like, oh, I really want to go to Nicaragua. Actually, even in Central America, I haven't been that interested in. It just kind of happened to land in front of me as an opportunity, and I took it. And I'm really glad I did. And then to answer your other question about engineering, like, no, I pretty much don't do engineering at all anymore. Actually, I yeah, I don't wear the ring. I don't even claim to be an engineer. Actually, I've taken the degree, but it's been a good 2 years since I've done any like technical engineering work. I'm not planning on getting my PEng at any point in time, and it's just something that I've kind of used to get me through parts of my career, and I've since moved on. Have a lot of respect for engineers, but I'm not one myself anymore, or
That
at least
that's
less
that's
so.
interesting. That's a really interesting take. But I'm kind of curious. Do you feel like were there some things that you learned during your engineering degree that you feel are still applicable to what you're trying to do now, even though you don't consider yourself an engineer? Like what parts of it became like a tool for you to use later on in life that you could transition into the domain you are in now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is yes. First of all, actually, let me clarify and go back on the statement that I'm not an engineer. I would call myself an engineer, but not like a professional. Like I'm not a PEng, and I wouldn't claim to be someone who like does engineering professionally. But I'm trained in engineering. Is maybe what I would call it. And yeah, I think a lot of the skills are very applicable. I've always people have asked me this question a lot, and I think I always go back to the idea. It might sound cliche, but the idea of like critical thinking and intense problem solving. Like um, throughout my engineering degree, as you know, or you both know, I'm sure, like it was a real test of learning and perseverance to get through those classes where the prof is like doesn't help you, doesn't give you proper notes. Actually, sometimes doesn't give any notes, or like there's questions on assignments that the TAs can't help you with, and it's not even in the textbook, and you have to use your mind to come up with creative ways for okay, how am I going to learn this? How am I going to find the answer here, and so that I can actually hand in this assignment and get a pass. And that's obviously a really small example, but that was kind of the whole engineering degree in a nutshell. It's like, how can I overcome this problem that I don't know the answer to, and sometimes isn't like there is no answer. Like they'll give you problems that don't have answers, and so that like rigorous problem solving mentality is something that I've absolutely applied to a lot of places. And I think having practiced that so much through the engineering degree, it was easy for me to kind of take that and plug that into other places in life. It almost came so naturally that like I don't even think much of it anymore, and I almost take it for granted. I'd say it's like I learned, I think, a lot of my creative problem solving abilities from grinding on all those assignments, and like especially like the math problems. Like I remember math being such a challenging subject, and it's funny, no one ever talks about this, but in the mechanical engineering degree, like you pretty much get a math degree. You actually do get a math degree. You're missing like one class, and they do that intentionally so that they don't give you 2 degrees for the price of one. But yeah, we get a math degree, and so like all of the math that I had to do, if you gave me math questions right now, I'd probably not be able to do them. But the thinking behind them is still there. Like I know how to work through those kind of equations and those problems and think linearly, but also think relationally and like bring concepts together and derive equations. Like deriving equations and thinking in first principles, like that's something Elon Musk does, and it's something that you can use to, and it doesn't have to be just equations. Like it can be like the first principles and like deriving the like the fundamentals of like a product vision. And actually that's something that I used a lot in when I moved into software, was like, how do I derive things in a more abstract way? Or maybe that's not the way to put it, but how do I take this like derivation approach and plug it into product creation and marketing? Actually, that was a big thing. Actually, one thing that comes to mind is when I was working in my last job in software, the CEO of our tech company wanted to come up with an equation for what it was we were building. Like he called it, so the company's called Smart Access, and he wanted the Smart Access equation, like this plus this equals Smart Access or equals our product. And so I helped him a lot with that. And it was this derivative thinking of like, what are the fundamental pieces here, and how can we boil everything down into something that like is cumulative, like it adds up to create this bigger piece. And so to me, that was like kind of like doing these math assignments, and it had nothing to do with math. There were no variables; it was all ideas, but it was the same kind of thinking. So anyway, that's an example.
For sure. I think, even kind of like what I'm thinking too is that, because, I mean, similar to you, Chris, in some extent, I mean, I'm doing stuff completely different or what I would have ever expected than, say, like when I was finishing my bachelor's degree at that period of time. But I think a lot of these baseline skills that we get when we're engineering students or when we're young engineers, they're really transferable in different areas. And I think the way that you were putting it too is that this ability, it's a test of learning. This ability to learn things that are not specifically taught to you in some way is, I think, a lot of what the engineering degree is like. I think it's almost summed up as by the time you graduate as an engineer, you basically have the ability to learn. So one thing I'm curious about, maybe it could be from, say, early on in your career right now or when you were a student, but do you have a specific time that you face some adversity, say, like within your learning or like within your work? Maybe it could have been like during your transition from like your mechanical engineering going into more to the software side. Do you have an example of when you're facing adversity and kind of how you overcame that? And then maybe talk a little bit about on your journey too of like that adversity and some of the things that it taught you.
Yeah. Oh man, I have lots of examples. My career has been full of adversity in different ways. Do you mean specifically in regards to learning, or like more on a more broader topic?
I think probably broad actually should be okay for this.
Okay. Interesting. What should I talk about? I think one of the most interesting, actually, this is a good one to talk about, I think. I think one of the most interesting challenges I've had to face recently in the last like 2 years was this challenge of career progression in a role that I wasn't actually trained in, but like learned on my own, and how to manage that progression and learning, and also how to manage the hierarchy of a startup company, and how to like fit in there. And so so on one end there was the challenge of like, okay, I got to learn all these skills that I haven't necessarily been taught. Like I have all this mechanical engineering background, this critical thinking that I can apply here, but like the language of tech, and like how do I talk to software engineers instead of mechanical engineers? Like they speak different languages, so how do I quickly pick up on that so that I'm not just trying to lead people from a place of without credibility. And so that was a big challenge. And then with that, as I started to progress through that, I had to figure out how to work in a small company at a high level with the main partners, and how to like fit in with them and not step on people's toes, but also like excel and grow in the role that I had. So one of the biggest challenges was I was a product manager in the last company I worked with, and the head of product was maybe in more of like an operations management role, but he was coined like head of product, and so he was the one making the final decisions about the product, even though I was the one kind of leading all of the visionary stuff and leading the dev team in a lot of ways. And so where I'm going with this is one of the biggest challenges was actually trying to work with him to figure out how our two roles could complement each other and not butt heads too much. And because we were such a fast-moving company, and we were growing quickly, and we were trying to figure things out like on the fly, because we were a small team at first, and there was friction just in the lack of time that we had to figure these roles out. Like we couldn't spend 2 weeks trying to say, okay, like what are all the things that you want to do in your career, and here are all the things that I want to do, and how can we both have that? Like we didn't really have the time to figure that out. So it was kind of like, it was just like, all right, fill holes, fill gaps, and that's what we did. And then we got to this point where the two of us, like the head of product and the product manager, were a little bit not necessarily butting heads, but kind of trying to fill similar roles at the same time. And then part of what the head of product was also doing operations, and I was also doing more project management. And so it was really a weird, like roles in a startup are dynamic, and in most companies actually roles can be dynamic, but especially in a startup. And so one of the biggest challenges was working with the head of product and the CEO to try and figure out how I could kind of move into this role and create space for myself, actually, is maybe a way I'd put it, is like, how can I create space for myself to work here and do what I think I need to do good work, while not butting heads with the management team, and while complementing the other people who are also doing similar work or working in the same area as me. And that was actually a real challenge. It was challenging for me because I like to learn fast, and with mechanical engineering, that seems to come naturally. So I was able to excel quite quickly, I think faster than maybe like the head of product and the CEO were expecting. And so it came fast, and it was like, okay, all of a sudden Chris is right up here at the level that we wanted him to get to, but it happened way sooner than we thought. So we weren't really ready for this. And I think they did a great job within the whole startup world of like figuring this out, but it took time, and it took there were some challenging conversations that I had to have with the head of product to say, like, look, like you have to give me the freedom to make some of these decisions. We're trying to do the same thing and trying to have authority over the same piece here, and we can't. Like at the end of the day, one person needs to have responsibility and final say and lead. And so I had to actually kind of request that, and that was a big learning moment for me in my career, to like actually request more leadership and authority. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's like a little bit daunting. There's the whole you feel self-conscious, like going to your boss and being like, I want more responsibility, or like I think you should give me this responsibility. Like you have to portray it with a sense of confidence and ownership and like belief that you can actually do it. And so yeah, I remember having some difficult conversations with the CEO and with the head of product to take more ownership over this role of product management, and yeah, that was a fun challenge in working through creating space for myself and managing the relationships with, the executive team, basically.
I wanna touch a little bit more on this portion of tough conversations, especially because we're all, say, a lot of the people who might be listening to us are early in career, still students, and I want to specifically talk a little bit about it on that too, because say even for myself, I'm within a different domain than I was at previously, and I think even coming to this domain, I felt a little bit frightened at some point in time because I was almost thinking, are my perspectives as valid as somebody who maybe has like a specific degree in this domain and has spent time here before and has a lot of experience? So for you, Chris, like I wanna kind of ask you, what helped you, like maybe firstly it will be like this. Did you feel like any portion of like at the beginning maybe like a little bit of an imposter syndrome with like that particular role within the startup? Like I just say on like my experience, like it took me a little bit of time to kind of like overcome that and realize that for myself. And two, how can we have the confidence that like say like if we're gonna go in to do like a different type of job than we were trained for beforehand or like a different type of industry, how can we have the confidence to say like go up to our higher ups and like ensure that like our perspectives are like like for all intents and purposes as valid as somebody else who has like many years of experience and perhaps has like a specific degree for that industry?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, the second one seems like especially relevant in the engineering world, which is very based on tradition, and there is a little bit of like there's a lot of weight that comes with someone who's been in the mix for a while or done engineering for a long time. Like there's a lot of credibility that is there, and that's interesting. I can speak to that too with some of my other experiences. But for imposter syndrome, yeah, I definitely had that at the beginning. I've had that lots of times throughout my career. So for anyone listening, that's pretty normal, especially if you're changing roles, moving to a different job. Like it's a very normal experience, and getting through it, confidence is interesting because you can't. Well, on one hand, I want to say you can just decide to be confident, but that's not always the case. But yeah, I definitely remember feeling bits of imposter syndrome when I was at Smart Access, and I think maybe what helped me the most is really feeling like I was doing the work to be there. And what I mean by that is I would own the fact that I've never worked in a tech company. I've never worked in like software before. So what does that mean? Well, it means that like I should probably spend more extra time with the developers, asking them questions and figuring out how to speak their language, because they're the people, even though I might be leading them as like the product manager and they might be like not working for me, but they're taking direction from me. I still don't necessarily know their language as well as they do, and I should be respectful of that, and I should put in the effort to like understand it and learn it quickly. And I don't think that should be something that like stresses you out too much. And like I had to really fight with that. Is like, okay, don't get stressed out by this. It's just a matter of like it's a learning problem. It's like I need to learn this like as I'm going. And so I spent a lot of time with two of the main developers. Like I would kind of like stand over their shoulder sometimes when they coded. Like I'd ask them like, is it okay if I like watch you code this? And like, can you explain to me what you're doing? And like and then terms would come up that I wouldn't know. Like API is a big thing in the software world, and for the longest time, like I had a hard time wrapping my head around like what the hell is an API, like application or programming interface or whatever. I don't even remember the acronym right now, but like there are all these like concepts, and like the software world is so complex, and you can't remember everything, and not every engineer knows every bit of software programming. So, but it's like trying to, something that really helped me was just like knowing that I'm doing the work to try and play at this level. And whether or not I'm actually playing on that level doesn't matter so much as long as I'm putting in the effort. And I would do that by spending a lot of time with the people who really knew what they were talking about and just being like inquisitive and curious and trying to absorb actually. And then I think that really helps build confidence. And then what else? Applying from applying from like other places in your life, like it also helped to remind myself, like, okay, I've done this before. Like, so I'm in software, but that doesn't mean I haven't like come up with some derivative equation for a marketing statement in another place in my life, or like I was doing all of this work to help the designers come up with how we were going to design our app, and I've never done that either before. That's technically, but I've been an artist throughout my whole life, and I've loved sketching. Like I love sketching, and I'm actually pretty like big into design too. Even though I've never done graphic design, like I know the difference between a good design and a bad design for the most part, and so I could draw on those things from like other places in life. And just because I didn't have the technical certification of like graphic designer or UI designer doesn't mean that I can't participate in those conversations. And so I think that's important to remember is you don't always need the certification to be involved and to bring in a skill set of some sort. You might not have the final say, you might not be the lead UI designer, but for me it was helpful to know that like, okay, yeah, like I can play in this space. Like I can talk to the designers and feel confident because I do this stuff as a part of my, as part of my side gig. And then, sorry, I got kind of distracted. What was so? That's maybe what I would say about imposter syndrome. But what was the second question? Was what again? Can you remind me?
I think it was just kind of more on touching, like having the confidence of having those difficult conversations with, say,
Oh yeah,
hires or like people within like those specific industries. And I think you even touched on that too.
yeah. Maybe the last thing that I would add, because I think I did kind of touch on that, is just having a sense of humility. Um, because from my experience, people who have been around for a long time and who know what they're talking about like to feel respected, as most people do. Like we all like to feel respected, and they like to feel acknowledged that they do have experience. Um, and so, and I think people are okay to be challenged, which is a whole nother thing. Is like you know being in a new role and having to learn on the fly is one thing, but you also have to have the capacity to like challenge thinking because there's old paradigms that need to be changed, and that can be really difficult with people who've been around for a while and are more experienced veterans of engineering and software, computer programming. But if you come at it with like coming at it with a sense of humility, I think is really important. So a sense of like respect, like you obviously know what you're talking about in this field of knowledge. I'm bringing a new idea, and sometimes I have to challenge like your thinking. And even though yes, you've obviously done this for a long time, but like here's a new alternative. Like what are your thoughts on it? Yeah. So humility, I think, is also a big thing.
Definitely. That's really interesting. I like the part you spoke about how you would spend more time with the developers and actually watch them code and stuff like that. Because I think, like, especially when someone gets into a new leadership position, I think most people have imposter syndrome. And I think when you're quite young, even more so. I don't know anybody that's been a young person in a leadership position that hasn't felt, imposter syndrome and kind of scared and kind of, hesitant and stuff like that. How important do you feel like it was to kind of, like you say, show that humility and kind of, more mentality that I'm here to learn, not just, you have to listen to me because I'm in charge here, and kind of hide behind your hierarchy, and rather than, you kind of gave that respect that, okay, you guys know more than me in this domain, I want to learn, and I'm going to kind of have the humility to do that. How did that affect the team dynamics with the people that you were leading? And have you noticed some similarities, I guess, between those team dynamics and other teams you've been on, like a hockey team or a group in university or something like that? Like, is there parallels that run across those, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important to always be learning and always be seen as someone who's learning and open to learning, and not like walled off, like I know what I'm talking about. From my experience of people I follow in big tech, in the startups, my colleagues, friends, family members who are in leadership positions, the ones who succeed the most are the ones who are constantly learning, and from the people that they work with and from their community, whether it's your team of developers, your team of engineers, your marketing team, whatever, whoever you're working with. Like if you're actively learning from them, actively curious in what they're doing, and giving them the respect that they deserve, you'll do well as a leader, I think. And I've seen that happen. And I've also seen the opposite. I've seen a lot of people who unfortunately take a bit more of a stance of like a bit more of an authority approach of like, okay, I'm in the leadership role, so I have the say here. I don't care that you've been here for 40 years. Like, I'm going to make the call, and too bad. And sometimes that is the case. Like, sometimes it is a matter of there's a deadline. Someone's got to make a call. I'm in the position to do it. I'm going to move forward with this. Sorry. But I think what's important in those moments is like the piece of humility and the piece of learning. It's like, look, I still believe what I believe, and I'm going to go ahead with it. But explain to me your side. Like, tell me, and like, I'll hear you out. Like, hearing people out is huge. Even if you disagree with them at the end of the day, and even if you move forward with what they don't want, if you've heard them out, they're way more accepting of whatever direction you might take. And so I've definitely experienced that. And yeah, the whole curiosity and learning thing, I think, is huge for leaders, and it can go a long way. Like spending time with your team, being curious, asking them questions. There were. I think when I first arrived at this last job as like the software project manager / product manager, there was definitely I would say like a little bit of tension in the air, or like there was a little bit of like some of the developers I were working with were like 30, 35, had been doing this for 10 years, and were pretty like high, like top of the class, like really good developers who knew what they were doing, and so much so that they were almost operating without project management, and actually they were operating without project management, without designers, even before I came, because they were just that good. They knew how to do it. They'd been doing this for a long time. And so when I came in, there was no one said anything, and I didn't receive any like serious flack, but I could tell there was a little bit of this feeling and this thing that hung in the air of like, who's this young kid who's like all of a sudden going to do project management for us? Like, he doesn't know anything about software. And they're right. Like, I didn't at first. But what I did know is how to lead projects, how to provide guidance, and how to communicate well with people and bring people together so that they can communicate well. And that was needed. And that's what I did. And in being really curious and like standing by the developers and watching them code and asking them questions, which not a lot of people do, by the way. I say a lot of them, there was only like 3 or 4 of them, but they opened up to me a lot. And I think I got a lot of their respect quite quickly when they saw me, like sit down beside them and actually talk to them about their code. And ask questions and openly say, yeah, like I actually don't know what an API is. Can you like explain it to me so that I know? At first, it can be met with a little bit of like, what? You don't know what an API is? Like, so there can be a little bit of that, but then, once you show that you're there to learn and you can learn quickly, you garner a lot of respect. And so I think by the time I left, the 2 lead developers, I hope, had a lot of respect for me, and I do believe they did. And I think they were impressed with my ability to learn and not take too much charge from authority, but kind of be curious and learning, and then lead with lead as more of like a collaborative. Like if you're learning from your people and curious from your team, you're absorbing all of the different perspectives. And so when you make a leadership decision, everyone feels confident because everyone's felt heard. And that's huge. Like it makes things so much smoother in a lot of ways.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think, I can completely agree with you. And I think, one thing that I've sort of thought about too during my transition from, say, chemical beforehand to more kind of software and machine learning now, is that as you ask more questions, I think as a student, my mentality right off the bat was like, at the very beginning, was like, okay, asking questions like puts you in a position of vulnerability, or admitting you don't know things puts you in a position of vulnerability. But actually, I've come to realize is that the more you're willing to basically just be like, hey, like, I actually really don't know this. Do you mind just kind of quickly explaining this to me? Or, a acronym that people are just freely using in a company, but you have no idea what it means, and you go and ask, people are like, oh yeah, no problem. Like, so actually, my mentality off the beginning was that, okay, there's going to be some friction here, but really it actually, it opens yourself up, and I think it helps create stronger bonds too between coworkers when they realize you're coming with like authenticity, and you're coming with honesty, and they can see that you're trying to put in the effort to like learn and grow. I think too that helps create and build stronger relationships. So I know, Chris, you've touched a lot so far on, say, some really great kind of skills or ideas for that you've used so far in your career. I'm kind of wondering specifically when you're trying to map out like the transitions between, say, beforehand when you're doing like traditional mechanical engineering work to then you're going in kind of software, and then it could even be like now currently what you're doing. How have you kind of thought through, say, some of these like transitions, or like what has been sort of like your guiding light for that? And then as well too, like for people, say like students now or young professionals who might be kind of also semi-interested in maybe switching their kind of focus, how, like, what are some skills that you say would be like valuable between anything that you've done so far?
My guiding light. Okay. That's tough. My transitions have been different. I would say one of the biggest things for me has been like talking with other people, and specifically people in leadership positions. And actually, so the two biggest transitions I've went through so far in my career was from quitting engineering at Dialogue, was the company I was working for, and then quitting this last software job. And in both of them, maybe counterintuitively, I went pretty much straight to the upper management team and told them that I was leaving, like almost immediately when I knew that I wanted to go. No, actually, that's not true. Not almost immediately. Like I would first say that like lots of people have thoughts about leaving and then need to sit on it for a while, and that's totally fine. Like I would. You don't always know that you need to go. You sometimes have this inkling or this intuitive sense that like, oh, this doesn't quite fit. And if you have that, I would recommend talking to peers about it at first, and colleagues, and then eventually probably someone in a leadership position that you trust. And that's what I did, and that was actually huge for me. So in Dialogue, I went to there were two people that I was kind of close with in the upper management, and when I mean upper management, I mean like principals, like executives. And I forget who I talked to first, but I reached out to one of them that I'd met at one of like the Christmas parties, who was actually in charge of the studio in Toronto, so not involved in Edmonton, which was kind of nice because I felt like I could talk to him quite transparently without influencing too much what was happening in my own work at the office in Edmonton. So that was obviously a huge benefit. And I just reached out to him. I knew he was in Edmonton for like visiting and working on a project, and I just straight up told him like, I'm thinking of quitting and I want to talk to you. And he was so open and receptive to it. I was amazed. Like he asked me. We went out for a drink and dinner. One of the nights that he was in Edmonton, he wasn't there for long, but he was like, I want to take time to talk to you because he liked me, and he saw that I was kind of putting myself out there and being a bit vulnerable to say like, here's how I feel, and him being a good leader saw that as, okay, this person has potential to grow and do something, is going through some big changes in their life, and like I want to help them out, and so he did. And so we went for dinner and we went for a drink, and I basically told him what I was thinking, and his response was basically like, yeah, I don't blame you for wanting to quit, and like you should quit. Like was kind of the answer he gave me, and I was kind of blown away. And yeah, he basically kind of responded like with like, you should go, and like we'd love to have you back, but it sounds like you're needing to grow in other ways that we can't serve you here, and like if that's the case, you should follow that. And then maybe reach out to us in a couple years. And so that was a big learning thing for me. And that doesn't mean every time you're not enjoying your job, you should go to your boss and tell them you're thinking of quitting. This is more like if you're seriously feeling unrest about, the career that you're in or the position that you're in, like sometimes the leadership team within your own company are the best people to talk to. And if you're in a good company, they should be well receiving of it. And if they're not, that's going to tell you something about where you're working, and maybe that's something else to consider about, why you might want to be moving on. And I did the same thing in Smart Access, the last company, but I actually went straight to my boss. And it's funny, basically, we came back from Christmas holidays, and I was feeling really restless, and not so much about the work. I was really enjoying the work, but I was feeling restless more in my soul about COVID and being stuck in Edmonton, and just like feeling like I can't do my best work right now. Like I'm stuck. And so I went. I was thinking. I was mulling it over, and I was trying to feel out. Okay, should I talk to him about quitting? Is that really what I want? And I wasn't sure. And then I got back from Christmas holidays, and the first day back, we were doing like quarterly goal setting. So we were setting our goals for like 4 months down the road, and we were having a big team discussion about it. And I was trying to like talk about my goals for the next 4 months, and it just felt wrong because I was like, something in me is like, I don't want to do I don't want to commit to this. And so basically, sorry, I'm getting notifications here. I'm going to try and turn this off.
No reason.
Yeah, so it felt wrong. We were doing quarterly goal setting, and I didn't like it. So the next morning, I got up, and I think I just straight up called my boss, like first thing in the morning, and was like, hey, I need to talk to you. And then I told him, like, I felt awkward in the meeting yesterday doing quarterly goal setting because I actually don't know if I want to be here for the long period of time. And then I explained to him all this stuff about how it's, it's not necessarily the work that's bugging me, but I just like I don't feel right in my ability to work right now, and something seems off, and I feel like I need to go explore some things on my own for a bit. And it was awesome. He's a great guy. I really like him, and we had a friendship before I worked for him actually, which was helpful. But he took it really well. He basically ended up giving me a full week to like think about the decision, and his response was, "We really want you to stay." But similar to the first experience, he also said, like, "Look, if you need to go, like you need to go, and we'll support that. But we want you to stay and like take a week to think about it, but know that we'll support you if you leave." And yeah, I did take the whole week to think about it. Actually, it was a really tough decision for me. I wanted to stay, but I also felt this pulling elsewhere. And so, on the Friday of that week, I had another meeting with him, and we talked about it, and I told him I was going to leave, and he was great. And then we planned like 30 more days of work to say, like, here's what you're going to finish up. You're going to close up all your projects. We can start looking for another person, and then we're going to move on. And also, like, yeah, keep in touch. And if you later down the road there's a time where we work together again, then great. So I've had really good experiences with that. And not every leader will be that receptive to that, but a good leader should be. Especially if you do it right and you do it with honest intentions. And that's kind of how I've carried myself throughout my whole career, is trying to lead with honesty and lead with vulnerability, as you just touched on, actually, because people recognize that. And it's uncommon. It's uncommon for someone to go to their boss and say, I'm thinking of leaving, and I'm telling you because I want you to know, and I don't just want to quit on you. Like, we have this idea in society that you give your 2 weeks notice and you're done. And I think that's really bad. That's especially if you want to be in a leadership position, like that just doesn't seem to be right to me. It's like you should have more of a relationship with your boss. You should have more of a relationship with your work, and rather than giving a 2 week notice and leaving, it should be more of a conversation of like, hey, I'm not feeling right in this position right now. I'm not feeling right at this company, and here's why, and I'd like to talk about it, and there's a possibility I might need to move on. Great, let's like work through these things and try and support each other. I'll try and support the company that I might be leaving. The company will hopefully try and support me. And I think there's, so I definitely say, like, if you're seriously thinking about a transition, I would talk to a leader in your life, maybe outside of the company first. Like I usually get lots of support and advice from people that I know who I trust to say like, hey, like I obviously run this by other people, like maybe my family, like my parents, or like I have other entrepreneurial people in my life that I can talk to and ask like, what do you think about this idea of me leaving and moving on? Do you think I'm crazy? And most of the time they've been like, no, you're not crazy. But sometimes I might be crazy, and it would be nice to have that first vet. So yeah, that's definitely a tool, is like talking to people you trust. And then I think next is like talking to the leadership team at your company and having a conversation with them and seeing where you land. And a lot of it is really intuitive, and trusting yourself is a huge part of it. And so I don't know how to explain that skill other than just like you do have to, like, if you know how to meditate, meditating on it, it's a great idea. Like just sitting on it and feeling in your body, like how do I feel about this? And yeah, your intuition is helpful for those kind of decisions. And so practicing kind of listening to yourself is really a good skill to build over time as well. And yeah, that's helped me a lot.
I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there. Like it seems like you have a pattern there where you're very self-aware of how you're feeling. And I think a lot of people, if they're uncomfortable with a job or what they're doing in life, they can have a tendency to kind of lie to themselves a little bit because they're in a position of comfort, right? But I think I'm noticing the pattern with you is that when you feel uncomfortable, you kind of just throw yourself at that thing and go for it. And I think actions like that actually will, like you say, build a lot of trust with yourself, because if you throw yourself into an unknown situation and you can only depend on yourself and your own skill set and that problem solving skill set that you learn over the course of your life and your degree, then you build that trust with yourself too.
Yeah.
And so it seems like
I just want to add one single word to just like one thing, Chris, I'm realizing, just honesty. Just a lot of honesty, like with yourself and how you like do your interactions with other people. And I think that's why you get that reception. But sorry, Tyler, please continue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
no, that's a good point.
if I could quickly add to what you're saying, Tyler, too, is like throwing yourself at the uncomfortable situation. It builds trust in yourself for sure. It also makes people trust you more. When you're the first to acknowledge that you're uncomfortable, you're quicker to get out of that discomfort, and people recognize that. Like it's kind of goes, it's unspoken. Like people won't call it out as much, but intuitively we all know this. When you see someone like call something out in a room, to be the first one to say like, this doesn't feel right, like you are looking at them and being like, wow, yeah, I respect that guy. He's the first one to call it out, or she, and they're going to be the first one to feel that discomfort go away. And you trust those people. You trust that they're going to be the person to speak up, and you trust that they're going to speak to you honestly. And so yeah, honesty is a great word to summarize that thought, and I really emphasize how powerful honesty can be in all things in life, but career transitions and making decisions is a big one.
Definitely. And so it seems like you're moving, you're being honest with yourself about what you want to be doing, and you're exploring new things, and you're kind of breaking the mold from traditional engineering into what you're doing now. And you were speaking about, before we started recording earlier, that you're kind of getting into a new area of developing new projects for yourself. And I think it'd be super interesting to hear about that a little bit. But the question that I do want to ask you is, for like someone that's in university and they're taking their degree and they're interested in engineering, but with all the things they're looking at and the traditional career options, and they're just not that curious or driven to do any of them, but they're just the paths that are open to them. How can they kind of develop more of a why for doing what they're doing? And, how can they learn what they should be using, the skills that they learn in university, to apply that to what problem should that person be solving in the world? And kind of how have you kind of discovered that for yourself, and what problems do you want to solve that are way outside the bounds of traditional engineering or what you learned in university?
Yeah, I can hopefully speak to that. Oh man, yeah, coming up with your why is a never-ending problem. It's like it's always changing. You're never gonna find it and then be like, oh, I'm set up for the rest of life. Like that doesn't happen. I think maybe one thing that I would caution against is trying to go too big and solve, like trying to know your life's goal from the get-go. Like I didn't know it. It's rare that people know exactly why they're doing what they're doing, or like what they need to do to find the most fulfillment right from the get-go. And I think finding out that why is by trying things. So like even as I was doing engineering, like I felt like I wasn't going to be an engineer, actually. Like halfway through engineering, I was like, yep, this is not going to be my forever career. I didn't quit. I could have. And that's one option too. That's okay. If you decide you don't want to be an engineer and then you go do something else, that's totally cool. But also there's something to be said about sticking out and then trying something and seeing where that leads you. Like I kind of had this vision in my mind of like, okay, I don't want to be an engineer forever, but I know architecture and engineering are linked. And I know that there are lots of like building design firms that hire engineers and also architecture and so students. And so I could kind of weave into that route. And so one of my big internships in the mechanical engineering program was with Stantec, and then I worked with Dialogue after. And I was kind of like exploring this idea of, okay, what is it like to create buildings? Like, I don't want to be a mechanical engineer and work in oil and gas. Working in space seems a little bit far-fetched for me and out of my purview. And but what else can I do in this space that might find enjoyment? And it might not be perfect. Like, I wasn't like, oh, buildings engineering, yeah, perfect. It was just like, this seems interesting. Let's unpack this. And so then I did that. And then while I was in engineering at Dialogue and like seeing all these architects, at first I was like, oh, maybe I'll become an architect. And then 6 months later, I was like, oh no, architects just do kind of the same thing that engineers do. And I actually don't want to be an architect. So what do I want to do? And then I started going to the Startup Edmonton meetups because I had this inkling again, this like intuitive sense that like I think I need to work for a smaller company and I need to do something that's a little bit more hands-on and more involved. So I went to Startup Edmonton. I was like, what's going on here? There's a whole bunch of small companies that are trying to build new creative ideas. I went there for a couple months, just like while I was still at my job. I'd go, luckily it was almost right beside my old job actually. It was really nice. And so I'd go to this community and kind of just like poke around with all these software engineers. And it turns out like they were almost all software engineers. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. Lots of AI talk here, lots of machine learning. So then I took a machine learning course on the side. And I found that actually pretty interesting. It was kind of like math and engineering with this new spin of software. And so I was like, okay, software seems kind of cool. I'm pulled in this direction. So then I started, getting more involved in the startup community. And then I started actually like looking elsewhere for jobs. And I found this one at Smart Access. And I ended up quitting Dialogue to move to Smart Access to do software and project management. And then I moved into product management. And then I'll talk about what came next later. But yeah, I think for young people, it's like you're trying things, prototype things. I love the term prototyping. Minimum viable product, an MVP, or like what's the smallest actionable step you can take to move forward. And with careers and jobs, like it can be difficult to prototype in really small ways because you get a degree, it's 5 years, so it's bigger. They're higher commitment things, and that's too bad. And we won't go into why that's that could be fixed, and I think it is getting fixed with online learning. But for now, that's the way it is, and so it's more a matter of like experimenting within the prototype you've created. So I've done this engineering thing. How can I prototype this the way that I want? And if it doesn't work, that's okay. I can move on to something else. And there's always other options, and there are always other places to learn. Like online learning is so great. That's a whole other topic, but that was a big thing for me too. Is like when I maybe felt like I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had some ideas, I would go and take a course for like $15. Like Udemy and Coursera are great online platforms where you can learn. I mean, a lot of it is going to be software, but there are management things and marketing and financial stuff. Like at one point, I thought I wanted to be a CFA, like a chartered financial. Wait, no,
analyst.
Yeah, chartered financial analyst. And so I got in. I started investing. I opened up my own investment account and started like learning about stocks, and I found out I really liked investing. But I also decided like I'm not going to do this as a career. I just want to do this with my money. And that's the fun part too, is like I thought about being a CFA for a bit, and then it turned out I actually just wanted to learn a little bit about investing for myself, but not necessarily jump into a career there. And I learned that through testing and prototyping. Like, it wasn't like I just decided CFA's for me and I'm going to go do that and all of a sudden change my entire career trajectory. It was like, no, I'm going to stay on what I've got. I'm going to try and experiment over here and like do a little playing around, and then kind of make a decision after I've tested something. And this idea of prototyping is so big in software. So if you're in software engineering, you probably already know what I'm talking about. But it's a really great practice in real life. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that I would say has helped me through my progression. Is like there were lots of little things along the way. There was never one moment where I decided engineering's not for me. It was tons of little things that built up, and it was me experimenting in different places. You never know. You never instantly know why or why not you should be doing something. You can only just keep playing and then redirecting your scope and narrowing it down. Like, the world has all these options, and I've always told myself, like, I'm never going to know exactly what I should be doing with my life, but I will be able to know what I'm not going to be doing with my life, or what I don't want to be doing with my life. And I've kind of had that in the back of my mind, is like, I'll never know the perfect career for myself, but I'll know what's not the perfect career. And I can know that through testing ideas. And every time I test something, I get a little bit closer to the perfect career. And so that's like, that might not be as encouraging as you want it to be, because it's like, okay, there's no one answer, obviously. But it's helpful to know that, like, I think that's generally just how life goes for most people. And I'm doing that now, actually. Is like, I'm testing a whole lot of different ideas and things, and the last 2 months have been a big, like, testing playground for me, like a sandbox of, like, okay, turns out I don't know if I want to do this software thing forever, and maybe I'll come back to it. But I'm taking some time to test some things and to play around and feel out what might be next. And I think it gets easier too as you start to do it. So, if you have an idea, follow it to some extent. Go to the startup community, take an online course in marketing, open up an investing account, play around, see what happens. Start writing. If you want to be a journalist, start writing articles on the side. I did that for a little bit, actually. And then if you find out it's not for you, that's great. Actually, one of my favorite quotes is Toby Lutke, the CEO of Shopify. He says, "Failure is the successful realization of something that did not work." Failure is the successful realization of something that did not work. So, like, finding out that you don't like something is awesome. It's like, you successfully figured out that that's not what you should be doing right now. And so I think I know for myself, sometimes it can be deflating. It's like, oh, I did this thing and it didn't work. Like, whether it's a project or it's something in life that I followed and it like fell flat. And it's nice. I try and remind myself that, like, okay, that's actually a success. It's like I figured something out, and now I'm moving on to this next thing. So I really like that quote.
Yeah, I think, like, to me, a lot of kind of your mentality of how you think through things and how you're kind of, like, slowly narrowing down your scope, it seems a lot of, like, how startups iterate through ideas. It's like, basically, it's like, go hard and fast and, like, dig into something. And if you're like, you decide you don't want to do it, it's like, you just pivot, right? And I think that's actually is a really good, valuable skill to have, because, as you mentioned, the more we can spend, we might not know exactly what that why is going to be right from the beginning, or like where that specific and like there is no end point, really. I think it's like it's always evolving as we get older and as we have more and more life experience. But if we try things and we realize, like, okay, I really actually don't like this from, like, this short little rendition, then we can kind of continue pivoting ourselves, closer and closer towards where that, the final destination will be, like, whatever that means, right? But Chris, I just wanted to have, take the time to thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate this. I think there's a lot of really good advice in here, and kind of, it's also been exciting to hear, your transition, your journey from where you started to kind of like what you're doing now. And also I'm excited to kind of see, where this creative, like portfolio for you will go in the future.